MVP. When you look back at the season from hell that the Fever had, none of us expected them to be in this situation. None of us expected them to be winning a very close Game 3.
Can you imagine the shock if Caitlin Clark suddenly appeared in the WNBA Finals? At first glance, it feels almost impossible to believe. For weeks, we've all heard her season is finished, that a painful groin injury has kept her sidelined with no realistic way back. Yet hidden deep within the WNBA's rulebook, there just might be a surprising pathway for Clark to step on the court again if the Fever reach the championship stage. Picture it, women's basketball's brightest superstar returning on the league's biggest platform. It's the kind of dramatic twist that could change the entire narrative. But the reality isn't so simple. The rules, the risks, the roster adjustments, everything is connected. Some call it nothing more than a fantasy, while others strongly believe this exact loophole was designed for a moment like this. And today, we're going to break down every detail. So, what exactly does this rule allow? Why did the Fever leave the door slightly open? And how could Clark's return completely reshape Indiana's championship hopes? Before diving deeper, let's rewind a bit to the basics. At the start of this season, the Indiana Fever weren't supposed to be anywhere near this position. Nearly every analyst predicted they wouldn't even sniff the playoffs. The roster looked too young, too banged up, and far too inconsistent. Then came Caitlin Clark's injury, and for many, it felt like their season had been officially buried. But instead of collapsing under the pressure, the Fever clawed their way into the semifinals and are now standing just one win away from the finals. That in itself is huge. Aaliyah Boston has stepped into a larger, more commanding role. Kelsey Mitchell has been absolutely electric, while veterans like Natasha Howard and Odyssey Sims have added a much-needed stabilizing presence to keep this team alive. Even players like Sophie Cunningham, who many assumed wouldn't have much of an impact, have stepped up with grit, energy, and toughness on both ends of the floor. This Fever squad has slowly become the very definition of resilience. When you watch a team snatch victories they were never expected to win, it naturally sparks one big question. What would happen if their superstar suddenly returned? And that's the burning buzz all across Indiana right now. Fans can't stop asking, if the Fever have battled this far without Caitlin Clark, what kind of destruction could they unleash with her back in uniform? The truth is almost frightening, because Clark's presence doesn't just raise Indiana's ceiling, it completely blows it wide open. That's exactly why the speculation around her comeback is so fascinating and intense. But to fully understand the moment, we need to rewind and remember why this conversation started in the first place. Caitlin Clark hasn't touched the court since suffering a groin injury that sidelined her several weeks ago. When the announcement first came out, the Fever made it clear that Caitlin Clark would miss the remainder of the regular season, and naturally, most people assumed that included the playoffs as well. Groin injuries are unpredictable. Sometimes they fade quicker than expected, but other times they stubbornly linger for weeks. Clark managed to appear in only about 13 games this season, which feels almost unbelievable given the massive hype surrounding her historic debut. She was projected to completely shake up the league, and for a brief moment, that's exactly what happened. Indiana Fever games were selling out nationwide, television ratings were smashing records, and the team instantly transformed into the WNBA's must-see attraction. Then came the injury, and in an instant, everything the Fever had built seemed to collapse. But here's where things get intriguing. A typical groin injury can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks of recovery, depending on the severity. Right now, we're well past that usual timeline. Clark has had valuable time to heal, to rebuild her conditioning, and maybe even to quietly prepare behind the scenes. Which naturally sparks the big question. If she's healthy enough to go, why not bring her back? This is where the focus shifts away from health and straight into the rulebook. Because as much as Clark may desperately want to play, it's not just about her body being ready. It's about whether the WNBA's strict regulations will actually allow it. And that's where the story gets complicated. Normally, once playoff rosters are officially submitted at the end of the regular season, they're locked in stone with no turning back, and more hardship deals. No short-term 7A contracts, and definitely no chance to pull in free agents off the street. Once that playoff roster is locked, what you see is what you've got. But here's the surprising twist. Hidden in the WNBA rulebook is a clause that gives teams a rare loophole. It allows them to activate players who are already under contract but currently listed as inactive. In other words, players on maternity leave, serving suspensions, or sitting on the injury list can technically be moved back onto the active playoff roster if a spot opens because of injury. And here's where things get really juicy. Caitlin Clark fits perfectly into that exact category. She's not some random unsigned player hoping for a chance. She's already on Indiana's roster, waiting for the green light. But she's locked in, she's signed, and she remains a full part of the Fever organization. That's exactly why the buzz has exploded. In theory, Indiana could activate her if another player goes down with an injury, or if the league steps in and grants a rare exception. But let's pump the brakes for a second. Exceptions aren't common, and the WNBA doesn't just hand them out casually. Still, the fact that this language even exists in the rulebook proves one thing. This isn't some crazy fan fantasy. There is a real, legitimate pathway for Caitlin Clark to step back into action during the finals, even though the roster deadline has already come and gone. That's the shocking twist buried in all of this. And why does that loophole matter so much? Because it means Clark's season might not be entirely finished after all. While most fans assumed the injury announcement sealed her fate, the CBA leaves a tiny door cracked open. As long as you're under contract, you're never completely ruled out. The difference lies in one critical detail: being locked on the active playoff roster versus still being under a team's official controlled and injured player can remain on the inactive list yet still be technically eligible for activation if very specific conditions are met. That's a major difference from hardship or emergency contracts, which automatically expire once the regular season ends. What makes this case even more fascinating is how rarely this clause ever comes into play. Almost no players of Clark's superstar caliber have found themselves in this exact situation. Signed, sidelined by injury, yet possibly able to return when the stakes are at their absolute highest. It's the kind of scenario that forces coaches, front office executives, and even the league itself to pause and think very carefully. If Clark truly is ready, does Indiana pull the trigger? Do they gamble with their chemistry? Or do they trust the roster that fought tooth and nail to reach this point? That's why this loophole is more than just a dry legal technicality. It could become a season-defining decision. But here's the catch. Bringing back a player after weeks of sitting out is never simple. The risks are glaring. Caitlin Clark may not be in full game shape. She could aggravate her injury, and her sudden return might disrupt the rhythm of a team that's finally clicking together. Playoff basketball is all about rhythm and trust, and chemistry can be fragile. This is hardly the moment for wild experiments. But then comes the other side of the argument. Even at 60%, Caitlin Clark remains one of the most dangerous weapons in the entire league. Her deep shooting stretches defenses to their breaking point. Her court vision opens passing lanes and creates opportunities teammates didn't even see coming. And her relentless competitive fire elevates everyone around her. That kind of presence doesn't just help, it completely transforms a team. The potential reward here is enormous. With Clark back on the floor, the Fever suddenly gain a real puncher's chance against anyone, even the reigning champion Las Vegas Aces. She forces defenses to rethink their entire game plan, adjust their matchups, and respect Indiana in ways they might not have otherwise. The real question is, are the Fever bold enough to take that leap? Do they gamble on their franchise star for a once-in-a-lifetime shot at history? Or do they play it safe and guard her long-term future? It's the ultimate dilemma, short-term glory versus long-term security. And for a team standing just inches from the finals, that's a brutally difficult decision to make. Now here's the detail that really turned heads. The Indiana Fever only submitted 11 names for their playoff roster. That's surprising, considering every team is allowed to carry a full 12. So why leave that final slot open? Many believe this wasn't an accident at all, but a calculated decision. By deliberately keeping the 12th spot empty, the Fever may have given themselves hidden flexibility, perhaps even leaving the door slightly cracked for Caitlin Clark's shocking return. Think about it. If there were truly no plans for her, why not just sign another depth piece to fill the gap? Instead, they marched into the postseason with fewer players, relying on the strength of the core group they already had. And that raises the burning question. Did the front office quietly hold that spot with Caitlin Clark in mind all along? Officially, the Fever haven't confirmed anything, but the move is suspicious enough to keep fueling nonstop speculation. The thought that Indiana would willingly enter the postseason shorthanded unless a bigger plan was in play is hard to ignore. Because if Caitlin Clark truly has a path back, then that unfilled roster slot could be the subtle clue everyone overlooked. And if the Fever manage to stun the league and reach the finals, this decision might go down as one of the boldest strategic gambles in recent WNBA history. But let's step back into reality for a moment. Even if the rules technically make it possible, the far bigger question is whether Caitlin Clark is genuinely ready for the physical grind. Injuries don't magically disappear overnight, and playoff basketball operates at a level of intensity that pushes even healthy players to their limits. Reports indicate that Caitlin Clark hasn't been practicing at full speed with the team during this playoff push. That raises concerns that her conditioning might not yet be where it needs to be, and jumping straight into playoff minutes would immediately push her body to the limit. The risk of brain injury is very real if she comes back too quickly. But then again, this is Caitlin Clark we're talking about. She's a competitor unlike anyone else, wired for pressure and born for the biggest moments. Even without full team practices, you know she's been grinding, rehabbing, and quietly preparing behind the scenes. If there's even the slightest chance she can suit up, she'll fight to make it happen. That leaves the Fever with some heavy questions to weigh. Is she sharp enough right now? Is she strong enough to handle the physicality? Can she actually lift the team instead of disrupting its rhythm? If the answer is yes, Indiana could pull off one of the greatest shocks the league has ever seen. If the answer is no, it instantly becomes one of the most heartbreaking what-ifs in WNBA history. Now, just imagine for a moment. What happens if Caitlin Clark actually does return for the finals? The entire dynamic of the matchup would shift instantly against a powerhouse like the Las Vegas Aces. With Caitlin Clark back, the Fever suddenly gain a weapon that forces defenses to stretch across the court. Without her, opposing teams can pack the paint, daring Indiana's bigs like Aaliyah Boston to beat them alone while challenging the guards to make shots. But with Clark in the lineup, that defensive strategy falls apart. Her deep shooting range makes defenders scramble, creating open lanes for Boston, Mitchell, and Cunningham. Suddenly, the Fever's offense becomes far more unpredictable and dangerous. On the defensive end, Clark may not be flawless, but her presence allows Indiana to push the pace, take calculated risks, and trust her instincts to ignite fast break opportunities. She might not be at 100%, but her high basketball IQ and elite court vision can swing crucial possessions in the Fever's favor. And let's be real, the hype surrounding her return alone would send shockwaves through the league. Finals featuring Caitlin Clark making a comeback from injury. That's the kind of moment that goes beyond basketball. Fans would flood arenas, television ratings would soar, and the entire sports world would suddenly have the WNBA in its spotlight. For the Fever, this isn't just about X's and O's on the court. It's about believing they can go all the way and claim the championship. But there's another layer to this story, the WNBA itself. Don't think for a second that the league office isn't watching every development closely. Caitlin Clark is the biggest star the WNBA has produced in years, and her presence directly drives business. Ticket sales, TV contracts, sponsorship deals, you name it, she moves the needle. That puts the league in a complicated position. On one side, they want her to be healthy and protected. Rushing her back could jeopardize her long-term career, and that's a risk they simply cannot afford. On the flip side, a finals featuring Clark is a ratings and exposure dream scenario. Could the WNBA quietly approve her activation to draw in more viewers? Absolutely possible. Might they intervene and block it if the perceived risk is too high? Also entirely possible. Either way, this isn't just Indiana's choice to make. It could spark a league-wide discussion. And that's exactly what makes this situation so rare and extraordinary. This isn't just about basketball. It's about business, branding, and the very future of the WNBA. How the league and the Fever decide to handle this could reveal a lot about what they truly value in a moment like this. So, let's tie it all together. Technically, Caitlin Clark could still make a return for the WNBA Finals thanks to that little-known clause in the CBA. She's under contract. She's recovering. And the Fever intentionally left an open roster spot, keeping the possibility alive. But let's be real, it's still a long shot. She hasn't been practicing at full speed, The risks are undeniable, and the Fever may not want to gamble their long-term future on a single high-stakes decision. The league itself could also step in to prevent anything reckless from happening. Yet the fact that this conversation is even happening highlights just how much Clark matters to the WNBA. Her presence alone alters defensive strategies, electrifies arenas, and commands attention across the sports world. If she does make a comeback, it would go down as one of the most dramatic returns in league history. And if she doesn't, the Fever can still hold their heads high, knowing they battled their way to the finals without their superstar. So here's the big question. If you were in the Fever's shoes, would you take the gamble? Would you bring Caitlin Clark back for the finals, even if she's not at 100%, for a shot at making history? Or would you play it safe, protect her future, and trust the roster that got you this far? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you would do in this high-stakes situation. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more in-depth WNBA insights, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the action. We break down the plays, the strategies, the drama, and everything behind the scenes that the headlines don't tell you. Your support means we can keep delivering these deep dives into the biggest stories in women's basketball.